Hey everybody, I'm Missy.
And I'm April.
And this is SheelaNaGig. Welcome. I am Missy.
And I'm April.
Okay, and this is our part 2 of
The
Rose
iconic
O'Neill.
Rose O'Neill.
It is the iconic Rose O'Neill.
Yes.
Sure.
Of course, I didn't know who Rose O'Neill was until part 1, but
I don't think I really
now
did
she's
either.
iconic.
I just love cupies, but now we all know, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to jump back in because there's so much more to tell, which is why we had to do this in a 2-part episode. Let's do it. Jump in. As the beginning of the Cupid madness, Rose O'Neill was a well-paid illustrator with an earning power of perhaps $20,000 a year. That's close to $800,000 a year today.
Wow.
No slouch.
No slouch.
But those Cupid dolls made her richer and well-known almost overnight.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I never heard of her, but I certainly knew the Cupids.
Again,
Yeah.
amazing.
Right.
So, again, she was writing books, too. In 1912, The Cupids and the Dottie Darling came out. In 1913, The Cupids, their book, Verse and Poetry, came out. And the strip's spectacular popularity had inspired her to envision the Cupid as a doll.
Oh, so all the while that you were talking, I was picturing the doll, but that
At
is
this point, there's
something
still
that
no
came
doll
out
yet. This is
later.
her illustrations we're talking about.
Interesting.
And her advertisements. People loved them. So after those characters continued gaining this tremendous popularity in both adults and children, O'Neill began illustrating paper dolls called Cupid cutouts. So
You
that-
know, I just had a flash. Like it just went through my brain that I remember the way you got a Cupid doll when I was a kid in the 60s
Okay.
was that they were, you know, you put a penny in for a gumball?
Yeah.
They were in the gumball machine.
No way.
Yeah, that was totally how I got
They were?
my Cupids. Yeah.
Because they made a resurgence in the 60s.
Yeah, there was a huge resurgence because I remember they were, like I said, they were ubiquitous in my childhood,
Yeah.
and you got them from the gumball machine.
Yeah, they did make a resurgence in the 60s.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And I was born in 68.
You're already over the over the wave.
But I do feel like again, I got that little time-telling thing that had a Cupid on it. I feel like they were around in the 70s,
It could have
too.
been, yeah. I mean, they were pretty prolific, I would say, for a long time.
Right.
It's hard to say when they faded.
I know it is. So again, she did the Cupid cutout. It was the paper doll. She published it in 1912 in the edition again
Well, wait
of
a
the
minute.
Ladies'
I have
Home
a
Journal.
question.
Yeah.
Because the Cupid dolls were naked, and what I remember about paper dolls was that you put clothes on them.
Oh, you could put clothes on them.
I love it. Oh my God.
I want That's kind of what worked about it.
I want a paper doll, Cupid doll, because I love paper dolls, and that was, again, very popular in the 60s, a toy that I have a big...
When we go to the Ojai Spa for my birthday, can we
Yes.
bring paper dolls?
Of course. In fact,
Cupies?
it's a foregone done conclusion.
Can we do
to.
that?
Absolutely.
I want to do that.
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. I can't wait. Okay.
Me too.
So, again, it's those paper dolls then, again, that took her to the next level and created this Cupid mania.
Cupid mania.
And at that point, that's when children started to write her all these fan letters, mostly children, some adults too. And they were asking that she create something they could hold in their hands. And they had been cutting out these colored pictures out of the magazines and pasting them on cardboard. But what they really wanted was a round Cupid, something they could
it makes
feel in
so
their
much
hands and hold.
sense. No wonder this happened. No wonder the doll came about. Oh my gosh.
I know. And I think it's fascinating, personally.
Well, I think it's fascinating because it was my childhood. It was ubiquitous, like I said, in my childhood. It makes sense how it evolved.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
So as soon as these toy factories caught wind of the fact that she was interested in creating a doll, she was being approached daily. So in 1912, she was approached by a toy distributor called George Borgfeld and Company, and she agreed, after talking to many of these companies, to let them start producing the dolls based on a little plaster model that she had created. And they started creating these dolls out of bisque porcelain. And because she had copyrighted it, all those royalties went to O'Neill.
I love it. Oh, finally. Yay.
This is of story we've been waiting for.
Yes.
And at that point...
It makes up for a lot of the Sheelas that we've covered who had patents and it went nowhere and they died, and everybody took what became public information and cashed in on these innovations. So thank you,
But I don't want you to get too
O'Neill.
excited.
Well,
No, I shouldn't say
Don't
that.
break my
I know.
heart. No.
Let's just celebrate for a moment.
Okay, yeah, we're celebrating.
Take a moment.
Take a moment. We're having a
Celebrate.
moment. Yay.
Yay.
Okay.
At that point, she and her sister, Callista, they were very close. They ended up traveling to Germany to a company called Kester and Company. George Borgfeld had chosen, this is the production site,
Mm-hmm.
and they went there with the idea that they were going to suggest a few different sizes of the toy and show those artists how to paint them.
Mm-hmm.
They really wanted to be fully involved
Mm-hmm.
in the production, which I think is really cool.
Right.
And when she got there, O'Neill was assigned to 3 different artists who helped her create a product that she was happy with, which I think is
Okay.
super cool again.
Yeah.
And they said to her, before we go any further with this, we need to know, do you have anything that has to be a certain way or not? And O'Neill thought about it and she said, I do have one thing. I'm just asking that the tiniest Cupies of all will be the best ones.
Aw.
And the German artists were really confused at that point. They were like, we don't understand what you're talking about. That doesn't make any sense. We hate to tell you, but the smallest ones always sell for the least. So why would that be? And she said, I know, but we need to price it so poor children can afford them. And we need them to be really good. Isn't that so sweet?
That is sweet. Yeah.
So again, the artist didn't quite understand what she was getting at until she explained her upbringing. And she said, I was raised in poverty. And by the end, she had those 3 artists crying.
Ah.
And she said, do you know how hard it is for a child who's poor to even have a little Cupid or to even have a doll? As a philanthropist, she always focused on work meant to lift children out of poverty. And this was no exception. Isn't that beautiful?
That is beautiful.
Mm-hmm. So those Cupid dolls hit the shelves in 1913 and immediately became a phenomenon.
Yep. And my perception of that, you said that there was a resurgence.
Mm-hmm.
But, I didn't know or realize there was a resurgence.
Right.
And by the time I was a kid, they were plastic. They were rubber or plastic. I don't remember exactly. But they were iconic. They were everywhere. Everybody had a Cupid doll. I mean, you didn't even...
And she no longer had the rights at that point.
What?
And she no longer had the rights at that point.
Oh, no.
But I'm glad you enjoyed them nonetheless.
Oh, yeah, you couldn't help but enjoy them. They were everywhere. They were just part of childhood. It's not that I remember particularly having an affinity for them.
Mm-hmm.
It was that everybody had a Cupid doll. Like,
Right.
everybody had a Barbie doll, or, it was something that was such an integral part of my childhood. I never really thought that much about it other than they were cute, they were fun, they were a little creepy, they were interesting, they were different, but they were there. They were very present.
Right. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that you remember them. Because,
Totally.
Again, I think they were around kind of in the 70s, but not the way they were in the 60s.
No,
for
in
sure.
the 60s, they were just an integral part of childhood. You got them from the gumball machines, as I was saying.
You didn't have to go into a thrift store and buy dirty butt cheeks.
No, I
like
never.
I had to in the early 2000s.
Well, my
for
mother
son.
never went to thrift stores. I didn't even know what a thrift store was. But I had Cupid dolls.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. So in 1913, because they were such a phenomenon, it took factories in 6 different countries to fill orders.
That's
Huge.
amazing.
Huge.
Yeah.
And the Cupid became the first novelty toy distributed worldwide. And of course, it earned O'Neill just a freaking fortune.
I love
And to her
that.
surprise, Cupid dolls became popular, a fad that just nobody could escape, not only in the U.S., but in Australia, Japan, and places all over the freaking world.
Wow.
So I just want to share what a reader said from the Ladies' Home Journal in 1913. Her quote was, "Long live Rose O'Neill. She enhances the value of your magazine 25%.
Ooh. Oh my gosh.
Hooray for the Cupies and Rose O'Neill.
Yay.
I love that she
I
put
love it.
25%.
She had the metric right down.
That's how much it increases the value of
Wow.
your magazine, which
Huh.
is pretty significant,
That is
actually.
significant.
Yeah. So as the merchandising for the dolls continued to explode, they were turned out in celluloid, bisque, and rubber by the doll factories. They came in 9 different sizes.
Yes. I remember this.
The biggest one selling for $5.
I just want to say I wasn't born at the turn of the century.
That's true. But in the 60s, perhaps they still had 9 sizes. And the smallest one was just for 10 cents.
Oh,
so that everybody could afford one. And again, she published those additional Cupid books, and later came Cupids made out of wood, fiber, bakelite, china, and even so-called cuddle Cupids made of soft velvet. Children ate candy Cupids, and even Cupids made of pink ice cream. Gingerbread Cupids were sold everywhere. Cupids were printed on Valentine's, Christmas cards, birthday cards. They even appeared on wedding invitations. The original Cupids, like we talked about, were nude, but soon they were appearing in all kinds of costumes. With no regard to sex or nationality, they wore the military uniforms of many nations. They also wore red fezzes, corsets, top hats, mortarboards, chef's caps, aprons, Red Cross uniforms, spectacles, judges' wigs, swords, sombreros,
opportunity Cupids.
Yes, chops, and 6-shooters, to name a few.
Of course.
Yeah. And by the end of 1913, they were just known all over the world. They were as popular in England and South Africa and Australia as in America, and letters were pouring in from remote places everywhere, from the hinterland of China to Timbuktu.
Wow.
Can you
That's
imagine?
really something.
Being her?
Well, you know what? I can imagine. I just, they were, like I said, I don't mean to be so redundant, but they were just ubiquitous in my own childhood.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's really cool to see how they happened, how that was created.
Yeah, again, I just didn't even know about this.
Didn't
so I'm
know
so excited
about this?
Can you see why I went down this rabbit hole?
Oh, yeah.
So by 1914, O'Neill was one of the highest paid illustrators in America, and certainly was considered the highest paid female illustrator.
Wow.
Her income allowed her to completely support her family back in Missouri, and she traveled extensively in Europe, and she began to easily make friends with fellow artists and writers, and she hosted these amazing, extravagant parties.
Wow. And Missy, I just want to pause to remind our listeners that we are outside and the birds are serenading us as you're talking.
We love that. Listen to that bird. You probably can't even hear it. That's the thing. You often can't even hear these sounds, but there's a lovely little bird that's just chiming in.
It has a lot to say.
Yeah. I love how O'Neill is kind of giving Caress Crosby at this point.
Uh-huh.
I even had to look up Rose O'Neill smoking opium.
Yeah.
But nothing really came up about it. But I wouldn't be surprised if she was. She was hanging out in a very
She was pretty
progressive,
avant-garde, yes.
artistic crowd.
She forged her own
having giant parties.
ways, yeah.
The Cupid craze, which followed, was, again, unlike anything that was ever known in doll history. They kind of likened it to, remember the tulip explosion of Holland? There's books about that.
Yeah, sort of, yeah.
Yeah, kind of like that. Even in World War didn't stop. Soldiers of all armies carried tiny little Cupids with them into battle. And they kind of wore them as amulets or luck pieces.
Were they a good luck symbol? It's
a lot
so
of people
funny.
thought they were good luck.
This is coming back to me like I hadn't thought of it in years, but yeah, it was a good luck symbol.
And in the early 20s, it was just expected in everybody's home. So every mantelpiece, every dressing table, every piano had some kind of Cupid on it. Chorus girls carried Cupids in the streets. Shop girls showed them in the subways. Bathing beauties took them to the beaches. And fine ladies had brass Cupids on the radiator caps of their automobiles.
Brass Cupids.
I want one of those.
I want a brass Cupid.
Let's get those.
Okay.
Let's get one for each other's birthday. So musical comedies were written about the Cupids. The name went up in electrical lights on Broadway. Cupid ballets, vaudeville acts were common. People used Cupids for favors, bridge prizes. School teachers gave them to children as rewards for scholarships. They were substituted for ribbons and medals at county fairs. Financiers used Cupids for paperweights. Business houses used big ones in various advertising schemes. Some people put Cupids on wedding cakes. Jewelers used them in rings, tie pins, cufflinks.
Okay, can I just interrupt you for half a second?
Yes.
Rare antique Cupid charms are going for $2,000.
I am not surprised. I'm not surprised at all.
Wow. Okay. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, but it's fascinating.
I went down a little rabbit hole with
Yourself,
my phone,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. There was an eccentric millionaire who set up a giant stone Kewpie at the bottom of his garden, and there was an actress that attended a masquerade in a Kewpie costume and scandalized Greenwich Village. Children formed Kewpie clubs everywhere.
I want you to know you can get a Kewpie doll door knocker if you so desire.
I want one. I want one. I want Kewpie everything. I love Kewpies. But, kids wore these Kewpie badges. There was a Kewpie croon that was to the melody of Peter, Peter Pumpkin Eater. The Queen of England bought Kewpies for her grandchildren on their birthdays. And children died and were buried with Kewpies in their arms.
Oh my gosh.
And even had Kewpies carved on their tombstones.
Oh no.
Serious journals actually published essays on what they called the Kewpie philosophy.
Wow.
And there was even an article called The Religion of the Kewpies in the Universalist Review. This all sounds incredible now, and it even seems hard to believe. Even Mickey Mouse seems kind of small potatoes compared to Kewpies at the height of
Kewpieism.
Yeah, the height of Kewpieism.
It's so funny.
It really was like nothing else. A phenomenon.
I had no idea that when I was a kid it was a resurgence. I just, was just there.
Yeah.
But
why would you know?
Gosh, right.
And again, diving down this hole for me.
Oh my gosh.
I sure learned
a
lot of things. So beginning in 1914, Rose was living with her sister Callista in an apartment in New York's Greenwich Village. And at that point, she became involved with the women's suffrage movement. She knew she had this broad appeal and power. And she marched in parades, gave speeches, and illustrated posters with those Kewpies for the movement.
Kewpies for women's right to vote.
Again, completely disarming.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, known to the National Women's Suffrage Association in New York City as a suffrage artist, O'Neill lent her creative abilities to the cause of advancing women's rights, and her art just continued to be a big part of that suffrage campaign. And apart from being a significant moneymaker, the Kewpies, as seen in magazines, were cute characters with a message. And they often mocked elite middle-class reformers supporting racial equity and advocating again for the poor. And this was huge. This was huge. So O'Neill also used the cartoons to champion a cause, of course, that she felt so passionate about, which is the fight for women's right to vote. So she continued to assist with the activities of the women's suffrage movements, coordinated by the National Women's Suffrage Association that was headquartered at that time in New York City. And being part of this counterculture scene allowed O'Neill to participate and march in the city's active suffrage movement. Suffragists often held banners at the marches identifying their professions, so O'Neill hoisted the illustrator's banner at the marches for all to see, says Laura Prato, professor of women's and gender studies at Simmons College in Boston. She marched as a suffragist and illustrated posters, postcards, political cartoons for the cause. She championed dress reform, choosing to be brazenly corsetless underneath loose caftans.
You hussy.
I know. According to Prato, it was the more radical suffragists who added public marches to the movement. If you think about an era in which women were supposed to be domestic creatures in the home, marching through the streets of the city without a corset and caftans is a pretty radical act.
It is. Wow.
Oh, and I love this. So, in 1914, a crowd gathered at the fairgrounds in Nashville, Tennessee. After enduring a wait in the November chill, people looked up to the sky as a plane piloted by Catherine Stinson buzzed overhead until finally it dropped its cargo, which was parachuting Cupid-like dolls gently floating to the ground, wearing sashes advocating for women's right to vote.
Oh, you gotta love that.
These figurines, known as the Cupid dolls, were the brainchild of Rose, who is now intertwining her market and political activism.
Love it.
Would you love to have been in that crowd?
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, no, because that was a tough time for women.
It was.
And although it was empowering and women like Rose stepped up and really leveraged her influence to help further the cause. That was not an easy time for women.
I would have been there, though.
I'm sure you would have, Missy. I would have been there with you.
You would have been.
Yeah.
Even if it was a tough time, we would have been there.
We would have been there. Because it was a tough time, we would have been there.
Of course. Of course. So author Shelley Armitage often described Kewpies this way. She said, the Kewpies are free-thinking intellectuals who analyze and evaluate the impact of American culture on the rich and the poor, native-born and immigrant, adult and child, unrestricted by clothing and other symbols of the culture they criticize. They denounce social conventions responsible for widespread misery.
I love it.
Isn't that well put?
Yeah, that is really well put.
So
and it
well
puts
put.
into context a lot about the Cupid doll.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Who knew?
Who knew? I mean, it was something that
I didn't know.
I
I'm
took
just saying.
so for granted. Oh my gosh.
I know. So April 25th, 1915, the New York Press published an article. It was called The Leg Emancipation Women's New Plea. And in this article, O'Neill announced participation as a judge on the Polymural Prize Fund Committee of New York. The article references her innovative fashion drawing depicting feminine, flowing, silky trousers that were covered with a tunic.
Ooh.
O'Neill explained, "It is quite time that a decisive stroke was struck for the freedom of women, not only as regards to the suffrage question, and of course I am very keen on that, but on other matters too. The first step is to free women from the yoke of modern fashions and modern dress. How can they hope to compete with men when they are boxed up tight in the clothes that are worn today?"
Rosie really said it well.
Do you love her?
I love her, yeah.
In 1916, she became the first woman elected as a fellow of the New York Society of Illustrators. Prior to that date, 4 women had been named associates, but it was the first time that anybody had been elected as a fellow. That same year is when she wrote the Cupid Primer.
Ah,
The Cupid Primer.
near and dear to your heart, and Nolan.
I was looking, I know it's in my library, so I was
Yeah.
looking for it before I came today, just so that I could show it to you, but I couldn't find it. I'll find it though. The San Francisco Chronicle on November 25th, 1917, posted an article, and it promoted the beginning of the Cupid Corners in the newspaper.
Aw.
Rose O'Neill is the highest paid woman artist in the world. That is not so much because of the obvious perfections of her art as because of the great, clear human note she strikes. What time she puts her pen to the paper, just to look at a Cupid is to smile. To read a Cupid verse is to play sunshine upon a dark spot. They radiate happiness. They are winsome, mischievous little tads. Rosie O'Neill took them in the first place right out of her own fine heart, and for 6 years now, a multitude of folks have been the happier because she did that.
Aw, I love that. I just love that.
So O'Neill also produced a Sunday comic strip for newspapers starting on December 2nd, 1917. It was syndicated by McClure Syndicate, and the strip ended 9 months later in July of 1918. And when she wasn't spending time at Bonnybrook, her remote location,
Yeah.
O'Neill rented a Greenwich Village apartment,
Very
and she became
chic.
friends with many new Greenwich Village artists, musicians, and even Eleanor Roosevelt at this point.
Who knew Eleanor hung out in the village?
She did.
Oh,
Well,
cool.
again, because she was such a philanthropist, because she was
Right.
such an advocate of women's rights,
Yes, she was.
she became friends with Eleanor, and she started attending her salons,
Ooh.
as they called them in those days.
Yes.
I want to start having salons.
You'd be a great salon hostess.
I want to be a salon hostess. How can I do that?
Well, you just do it.
So in 1915, there was this march in New York, and it featured a children's van that was decorated by O'Neill, covered in Cupids.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, I love that. There were also billboards all over New York that featured the Cupids marching for women's right to vote.
I love it.
And besides lending a celebrity to the cause, Cupids helped the suffrage movement combat the stereotype of a feminist as an old, ugly, and anti-man kind of gal.
Right, which is still an issue today. If you're a
is.
feminist, you're a man hater.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
And that just wasn't the case because, again, these Cupies were just delightful.
Right. Yeah.
But they were also smart. Yeah.
Very.
So O'Neill illustrated souvenir programs distributed at marches and postcards and those posters, and many of them were involving Cupies for the National American Women's Suffrage Association. She also contributed a Cupie to a suffrage exhibit at a New York art gallery.
Mm-hmm.
And the National Women's Suffrage Association also selected women leaders to represent each of the various career fields for a 4th of July celebration at the City College Stadium. So O'Neill carried the illustrator banner to represent women artists in their skit, Women's Suffrage Victory, in 1917 for New York State. And in the 1920s, she participated in a series of women's international business expositions in New York City. Her distinctive art reflected on strong women themes and was used on the covers of several program booklets for these expositions. And at this point, she was just wealthy beyond her dreams. Then in 1921 and 1922, she staged exhibitions of her non-Cupie artwork. So she was still doing other artwork in addition. But of course, the Cupies were her bread and butter.
Right.
Yeah.
But I do want to say that one of the things that defined her was her versatility.
She
wasn't a niche anything.
No, she wasn't in any way. No. So she kind of, again, started exploring these monsters. She called them her sweet monsters, and they were these amazing images that fleshed out kind of Rose's subconscious, and they were captured into paper and ink, and they were captured onto paper in web-like strokes of ink and pencil. Mm-hmm. And the drawings often featured half-human, half-animal figures representing kind of, again, this Arcadian dream. Mm. And in 1922, she ended up publishing her first book of poetry, which was called Master Mistress, and it featured these illustrations of her sweet monsters.
And I just want to harken back because, this has been a 2-part series, but much earlier in her career, she thought she was going to be a writer.
Right.
That was the expectation. And she was a creative writer. She was a fiction writer. And there are these reoccurring themes of something very cute and sweet and dark and kind of creepy, for lack of a better term. That was a theme running through her history.
I love that. Yeah. I love that it kind of belied in some ways who she was, but not at the same time.
Yeah.
They were cute yet creepy.
Yeah, and so it had a certain depth to it that,
O'Neill went on to have exhibitions of her fine art illustrations. Mm-hmm. And by the way, if you get a chance to check out her beautiful sweet monsters, oh my God, they're beautiful.
Yeah.
They're beautiful.
Yeah.
They're just stunning. I have to share them with Nolan. I haven't done that yet, but I know he'll love them. So.
And you'll have to share them on Instagram.
Oh yeah, there might be like 5 posts of her on Instagram. I'm in love, everybody.
Yeah, Missy is going down that rabbit hole big time. Yeah.
So, she went on to have these exhibitions of her fine art illustrations, and this, of course, was considered her more serious work. Mm-hmm. And these were both in Paris and in New York, and she continued working even at her wealthiest. She could not stop creating.
And that's really the mark of a true artist.
Oh, yeah.
When they're just doing it for the love of doing it.
Yeah, exactly. And she was exploring all kinds of, different types of art, different mediums. She learned sculpture with Rodin.
Oh, well, of course. If you're going to learn sculpture, why not with Rodin?
Yeah. And she had several exhibitions of sculptures and paintings in Paris and in the United States. The only thing that creeps me out about Rodin, I have to say, I'm a big Camille Claudel fan. Uh-huh. And I saw the Camille Claudel movie when I was in college. Uh-huh. And I was so taken aback. Mm. It was kind of a little bit like F. Scott Fitzgerald and Zelda.
Right. Oh.
He took so much from her.
Oh.
She wasn't just his muse.
Mm.
And
well, that's a familiar theme in SheelaNaGig podcast.
It is. Yeah. It is. I hate to say it. So as soon as I heard she was working with Rodin, I immediately looked up to see if she was romantically involved. Uh-huh. I did not find any evidence of that, which I felt somewhat relieved by, but I know he was talented. I'll give him that, but I don't trust that motherfucker as far as you could throw him. No, I don't. But I suppose he was good to study with.
I would imagine he was.
Yeah, as long as he kept his friggin' hands to himself. Okay. So anyway, she did study with Rodin. She was in Paris. She actually lived in Paris from 1921 to 1926.
Wow.
Of course, she was still going back and forth,
Right.
but she kind of considered Paris her home during that time. And again, she was really, really trying to stretch her capacity for art at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1922, she was traveling back and forth between Europe and the U.S., and she purchased this great country house in Connecticut. It was a 10-acre estate, and it was on the Saugatuck River in Connecticut. And she named the estate, I love that always they have to name their estate, right?
Of course.
The Castle Carabas.
The Castle Carabas. What if I named my house the Castle Carabas?
I know, what should I name my house? I don't know, I'm going to think about that.
House on the hill.
Especially if I start having salons, I'm definitely going to
Oh,
name
right.
it
Yes,
something
you have
special.
to.
I have to.
Absolutely. It's a requirement.
So this, of course, became a hub for an artistic salon from 1922 to 1941. So she threw those fabulous parties. She was the talk of the country. She entertained artists, writers, musicians, theatrical folk from all parts of the world. She wrote articles against the war. She made speeches in favor of women's suffrage and dress reform and other matters that interested her at the moment. And she continued advocating for those feminist causes. She showcased her art at the 1925 Exposition of Women's Arts and Industries, designing the program cover with an illustration titled Progress.
Love it.
And she also hosted salons in her spacious New York apartment. She had, so she had different places. She could go to Connecticut,
She was a woman of influence
to the
and
Calabras,
reach. Yeah.
to the Carabras. She could go to New York to her apartment.
In the village.
In the village, yeah. And so she continued to spend her time in Europe as well. And she continued to be very dedicated to all of her causes. And as we heard before, she firmly disagreed with fashion trends for women. She saw that women were being cinched into restrictive corsets. And again, she was wearing those kaftans, and she was referring to them as flying squirrel dresses.
I love that. Flying squirrel dresses. How liberating.
What a flying squirrel dress.
That was the precursor to burning a bra.
It really was. It really was. And she also, at this point, she always was the underdog. And she really started taking issue with depictions of black subjects in mainstream art. She was really upset by the way they were portrayed. They were often shown with grotesque or over-exaggerated features. So she was one of the first illustrators to buck this trend. And she kind of used the same stylization techniques for all her characters. So that was kind of progressive at that point too. And she had a ridiculous amount of money. She didn't quite know what to do with it. She hadn't grown up with money, as we discussed.
Right, yeah. She was very poor when she was young.
And so she just gave away huge sums. She bought $1,000 violins for needy musicians. She helped boys and girls through college. She pensioned old servants and the like. And she spent years in London, Paris, Vienna, and Rome at this point. And she continued working with her sweet monsters, and she started making them in plaster, and she later reproduced them in large bronze and granite statues. And she was elected to the Société des Beaux-Arts in Paris, and the French government bought her painting, Man in the Hand of Nature, which was hung in the Luxembourg Gallery. Another entitled Death Triumph was purchased by the city of Paris and was hung in the Petit Palais. She then, in 1929, bought a 300-year-old monastery in the island of Capri and turned it into a dwelling and named it, again, the Villa of Narcissus.
Oh my goodness, the Villa of Narcissus.
Yes.
Is that like narcissist?
Probably. I don't know. But she was not a narcissist.
No, but...
What I heard, too, about this was that she had this friend. He was this old Italian man, and he lived there, and I think it belonged to his family, and he was kind of sick and couldn't afford it anymore. So she was like, "Oh, fuck it.
Oh,
I'll buy it. You
I'll
can
buy
stay
it.
there.
Don't worry
I'll just
about
visit."
it. She's that kind of person.
Yeah.
She's that
So
kind
that's
of
what she
Sheela.
did. That's what she
Wow.
did. She
Okay.
just was like, "Hey, you can live out the rest of your life here. I'll buy
No
it. Just don't
sweat.
mind if I come here and have a few parties."
Yeah, I have more money than I can handle.
Yeah, but I don't mind doing that for you.
Sure, why not?
Yeah, and he actually died there. I
Wow.
heard, and enabled him to live out his life
Wow.
in a place he otherwise would not have been able to live out his life.
Why not?
In 1929, she published a book called The Kewpie's Health Book, and it was used by many schools across the U.S. It was a national information program about tuberculosis primarily. And of course, there were large posters from the O'Neill illustrations in this booklet. They were also distributed by the Atlantic Visiting Nurse and Tuberculosis Association.
So she got into health in her later years.
Yeah, she was helping
Promoting health.
She was helping out the peeps.
Yeah.
Right?
She was.
And back to her Kewpies. The Kewpies were, of course, a fad, and they had a surprising staying power,
Mm-hmm.
but they were still a fad.
Mm-hmm.
And Kewpie knockoffs became more common, and then people started to kind of lose interest in the dolls, and the production of the Kewpies started dramatically slowing down during World War II. Remember I talked about people loved them
Mm-hmm.
through World War One,
Yeah.
and I think it really gave them a lot of happiness
Mm-hmm.
and hopefulness during that time. But during World War II, they became a little bit of a passing fad. And she only regained a little bit of her former popularity at that point because of the arrival of Mickey Mouse. But it didn't stop Rose, of course, from producing her artwork. As we talked about, she was a true artist, so it wasn't going to
Yes.
stop her. And she, fortunately, was asked to produce a second Kewpie Sunday strip, comic strip, starting on November 25th, 1934. She produced that, and that lasted until February 6th, 1937. But again, we know O'Neill lived this lavish life. She was throwing outrageous parties with her fortune. And she, of course, she purchased her homes in Connecticut and in Italy and
Paris and New York.
Greenwich Village. And then, of course, she was also continuing to maintain her family's homestead in the Ozarks.
Right.
So O'Neill is said to have earned at least $1.5 million from the Kewpie franchise, which is equivalent to at least $15 million today.
Wow.
And then her Kewpie fortune overall has been estimated to have been equivalent to today's sum of more than $200 million.
My gosh. Wow.
We are talking
really
a lot of freaking money.
lot
A
of money.
lot of freaking money.
Mm-hmm.
But again, she was not raised around money, and she had this extremely generous heart. She wasn't good at managing money.
Uh-oh.
And an example of this was like once in the city of Branson, Missouri, she decided that everybody should be immunized against smallpox.
Mm-hmm.
And so she paid for the entire town
Wow.
to be immunized.
Please don't tell me she ran out of money.
Don't ask.
Okay.
And then, of course, she frequently gave money to just artists in need,
Mhm.
artists who were struggling to succeed. She would have fans write her letters. She would send them money. She
Wow.
opened up her home to just whoever
Generous heart.
needed a place.
An empath.
She really was.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she had a lot of hanger-ons.
Well, yeah. She's funding all these causes that
I
would
know.
encourage a lot of hangers
So she was
on.
surrounded by a lot of people, but a
Yeah.
lot of them kind of sponged off her,
Okay.
sadly.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the stock market crashed and
Oh,
the
yes.
Great Depression began,
Yeah.
and she lost almost everything.
Oh, no.
So between
Oh.
being so generous and
Yeah.
giving so much of her money away,
Mm.
with the crash of the stock market and the Great Depression, she was left with very little.
Oh, that's so sad.
It's so sad.
That is sad.
And it was in 1937 that she decided to permanently return to Bonnie Brook. And she said she was tired of the world and that she was weary of its ways, and she had seen enough of London, enough of Paris,
Yeah.
enough of Vienna, enough of Rome, enough of New York as well. And she gave up her apartment in New York. She sold it. And she also sold her big country house in Connecticut.
Hmm.
And she leased the Villa Narcissus in Capri. And she probably made it a lease that said whoever moves in has to deal with her friend being there.
Oh, a clause.
clause.
A clause that allowed her friend to live there.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I'm sure that's why she leased it as opposed to selling it. Because, again, her big heart.
Oh, that's so sweet. That's so sad.
I know. And at this point, which I think is ridiculous, her illustration style was considered very dated. Well, how can somebody who's just a fantastic illustrator and artist, it's dated? I don't get that.
Well, we see that a lot in times where people just come in and they decide. You see it a lot in homes and real estate buildings, architecture. Oh, it's dated. And then somehow it becomes, certain looks become iconic or, classical or that kind of thing. But before it gets a chance to be appreciated in that light, it's dated.
It's dated.
We're on to the next thing.
Why can't you just say, oh my God, she's this amazing, versatile artist?
For many years, it sounds like they did, but she...
Yeah, so she started to be considered dated in her style, and only a few assignments were being offered to her here and there.
That's sad.
And eventually, those new sources of income weren't really coming in at all.
Mm.
And this is the most fucked up thing. This just killed me. Again. Because at this point, she also let most of the QP copyrights, trademarks, and patents
expire, and we
Why?
all know
Why?
Well,
Why? And again, I don't want to fault her because I love her, but why wouldn't you have the wherewithal to see how very fucking popular and powerful the QP image was, and to say,
I will say this:
I am going to not let that lapse.
Except for we've seen that over many Sheelas. You and I
want to cry.
You and I are very sensitive to that because we've seen time and time again
where
brilliant women let their patents lapse and the rest of the world jumped in and capitalized on it.
Of course they did. Because they knew that in the 60s it would make a resurgence.
Of course. They just knew that. They foresaw
How could it not?
But the truth is that what we've seen over and over again is that these brilliant ideas, when those patents lapse, go into the public domain, and other people just grab it. And it's very tragic. It's very sad. This is almost a theme on the SheelaNaGig podcast.
It really is.
Yeah, and
let me just say, I'm just going to give a little note here. If you create a patent,
don't give it up.
Don't give it up.
Yeah.
Just when it becomes time to reinstate that patent, please do it.
Please do.
It doesn't matter what it is, because you don't know. You don't
learn
know.
From history.
Learn from history.
Yes.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Oh God. Okay.
All right. We've done our public service announcement.
So, whether Rose was just saying this or not, I think she really did love being at Bonnie Brook. But she stated, "I love Bonnie Brook better than any other spot on the earth." So to her, it felt really good to come home. She really didn't have much of a choice in that point.
Well, she might not have, but
again,
I do have to say, how old was she by that time? Do you know?
She was in her 50s.
Yeah, I mean, you know what happens between your 50s and 60s. You start going, fuck it. I don't need to set the world on fire anymore.
Right.
I want to relax.
She was in her mid 50s to mid 60s. Yeah.
I'm projecting a little, but
yeah. So basically, what she said of Bonnie Brook is that here I have done my best work. Here in the shadow of the Ozark Hills, I want to live and I want to die.
Oh.
And she also felt that she had lived a very full life.
Which I think I could understand why she would feel that way.
Yeah.
Seems like she did.
And she certainly worked really hard.
Yeah.
And so she's just kind of said, the time has come for me to rest a bit. No more drawing, no more sculpture, no more verses, no more dolls. I shall do nothing at all now but enjoy Bonnie Brook, and perhaps I shall write my memoirs. But then, Rose had another dream.
Rose had a dream. What did Rose dream this time?
In the same house, in the same room where she had the dream about her Cupies almost 30 years before, there suddenly came another dream. This time it was a little laughing Buddha-like figure that she called Ho-Ho.
Ho-Ho.
I don't know Ho-Ho as well.
I never heard of
But
Ho-Ho.
you know what? I did look up Ho-Ho, and the image is familiar. I've seen that image. So, Ho-Ho. You can look it up right now, April.
You know I am.
So Ho-Ho sits in an oriental attitude of meditation with little, and I think that's a little un-PC to call it an oriental attitude of meditation. I'm sorry about that, I'm just quoting her. With little plump hands spread out on little plump knees, but his head is thrown back in a hearty laugh. Just as the Cupid smile was a little different from any other smile, the Ho-Ho laugh is not quite like any other laughter. There is something odd about that laugh, Rose said. It is funny, contagious, it is winsome, but the wisdom of the ages is in it too. So Rose O'Neill said she had carried the idea of Ho-Ho's laugh for years, meaning to materialize it for the world eventually. And year by year, as the world grew less and less funny, that laugh got clearer and clearer in her mind. It is the sort of laugh, O'Neill said, that makes a laugh in the beholder as kindness makes the warmth of returning kindness. Ho-Ho was a sort of little clown Buddha, all his stored up wisdom finding its last word in the supreme wisdom of laughter. This kind of laughter is man's final defense against despair, she had said. So O'Neill attempted to bring the Ho-Ho doll to market in 1940. They were actually manufactured, but unfortunately the timing was quite poor, with the bombing of Pearl Harbor in 1941, which negatively impacted the sales.
Oh, so sad.
Well, I hate to say it, but it was an Asian icon.
Mm-hmm. Oh, right. Hello.
Right?
Yeah.
And Pearl Harbor caused a lot
sense.
of issues with that, unfortunately. So after that, Rose said that she was really going to retire this time. And she didn't intend to do a blessed thing but sit on the porch and watch the spring come to Bonnybrook. And sadly, ill health started to plague her. She suffered a series of strokes in the early 1940s.
Aww.
No, she wasn't that old.
No.
On April 6th, 1944, Rose O'Neill died at the age of 69 of heart failure resulting from paralysis at the home of her nephew in Springfield, Missouri. Sadly, she died penniless.
Oh, that is sad.
I know, it just kills me. And she is interred in the family cemetery at Bonnybrook Homestead next to her mother and several other of her family members.
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of sad, but interesting. So Bonnybrook was actually destroyed by a fire just a few years after her death.
Oh.
And frankly, it had been in kind of dilapidation for a while. It had been kind of falling down. Mm-hmm. And her nephew had the wherewithal to remove her artwork.
Oh, thank goodness.
Just before she died.
Thank goodness. Yay.
Yeah, which was pretty amazing.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
That is amazing.
I know that sounds a little bit like arson, but
well,
I don't think it was. It was coincidental. It was a coinky dink. And he removed all of her artwork, thank God.
Thank God, right.
And it was eventually rebuilt, which is nice.
Nice.
And so O'Neill's cartoons, illustrations, short stories, and poems were purchased by over 50 national magazine publishing companies starting in the early 1890s and continuing until the 1930s, the late 1930s.
Wow.
Her illustrations appeared on 60 covers of national magazines.
Wow.
And she was a woman who created a life on her own terms with sheer will, determination, and creative talent. The ability to pursue all of her interests in spite of those social norms, those strict social rules that were placed upon her as a woman. It is so amazing. And, she was twice divorced. She was a suffragist.
Right.
And she was a rebel, certainly.
Yep.
Among reformers. But despite that, that's what's so amazing. Despite all of that, she was truly loved by everybody who met and knew her.
That's an amazing thing about her, because a lot of the women that we've featured have been very controversial figures, but most aren't very loved. I mean, they were judged, they were harshly judged.
Yes.
They were ostracized. She had an entourage of nuns.
I know. she was just such a beautiful, sweet
And so
person, and she
giving.
found this vehicle. She
Yeah.
found this vehicle that was completely disarming. That's really what it was about.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people could see her heart in everything she did.
Yes, even in the loss of so much of her income came from her generosity.
Of course it
and,
did.
you know, just really incredible.
And I do feel like she kind of fell into obscurity for a while after her death, which we often see.
Which we often see.
Mm-hmm.
Why we do the SheelaNaGig podcast.
But again, in the 1960s, we did see a resurgence
Huge research.
of the Cupies.
Very, very prevalent in my childhood.
Although I don't know how much she was credited at that point.
I never heard her name.
No.
You know, I heard Walt Disney. I knew Walt Disney, but I never heard of
He had a
Rose
penis,
O'Neill.
so
Well, yeah, that.
I shouldn't say that. That's true. So in 1967, though, the International Rose O'Neill Club was founded to preserve and perpetuate the memory and works of O'Neill and promote the cultural arts and to hold an annual celebration in Branson, Missouri. And the club to this day continues to provide scholarships to aid needy, talented students in the area of the arts. Pretty awesome.
Yes.
And then in 1993, the Bonnie Brook Art Gallery and Cupie Museum reopened.
Mm-hmm.
So they rebuilt the estate.
Oh, very nice.
And they basically have this team of dedicated volunteers. Could you please go there?
I would love to. I mean, we're always talking about SheelaNaGig podcast tours.
Field trips.
Yeah, field trips.
I so want to go there.
Road trip. Yeah.
But when you go there, it highlights, of course, the life of Rose O'Neill. And it, recounts her life from growing up in rural Pennsylvania to her success as the renowned creator of the Cupie.
Mm-hmm.
And it also shows just, her family home and her garden. And then the cemetery that is also part of that homestead. Her gravestone is there. In 1994, writer Shelley Armitage, who wrote Cupies and Beyond the World of Rose O'Neill, revealed her opinion concerning the impact of O'Neill's art. O'Neill's art centered on the shifting roles of women, ethnic groups, and children, often using a member of one of these groups to undercut the pretentiousness of the polished, urban upper crust. Or she treated humorously the in-group exchanges as a kind of private humor rather than the standard put-down. Her children, for example, are often savvy, Dickens-like characters, streetwise and resourceful, to whom the adult world is artificial or absurd, superficial, sentimental, and unrealistic. Class distinctions and implicit value judgments are hence inverted for an audience whose expectations were quite the opposite. Again, so well put.
Very well put. Very well put.
Mm-hmm. And then in 1997,
Yeah.
Bonnie Brook Homestead was listed on the National Register of Historic Places. In 1999, the Society of Illustrators Hall of Fame in New York City finally decided to induct O'Neill.
Oh, very nice.
Thank God.
Thank goodness. Yeah.
The National Women's History Project honored O'Neill during their 2008 theme, Women's Art, Women's Vision. And in June 2011, the Missouri Women's Council inducted O'Neill into their Outstanding Women of Missouri Hall of Fame.
Wow.
Why did it take so damn long?
It's forever.
It did, but you know what? Better late than never.
Right.
In 2019, O'Neill was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame for her efforts during the suffrage movement. It didn't come easy, though, as O'Neill was nominated at least twice before over a 3-year period before she was selected. But that induction appears to have been a catalyst for more future recognition. And in 2022, just a couple years ago, O'Neill was inducted into the Will Eisner Comic Industry Hall of Fame. And most recently, in 2023,
Yes.
she was inducted into the Toy Industry
Oh, right.
Hall of Fame.
Oh, well, she belonged there.
Thank God.
Yes.
And I lastly, just look her up.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many countless books. Both PBS, YouTube have done all kinds of documentaries that you can check out. There's just so many publications, advertisement, magazine covers. It's just impossible to even share what's out there. I am actually really excited to go watch her documentaries. That's my next thing I'm definitely going to do. But I can't possibly sum it all up for you. So you must check her out. Call to action, go check out Rose O'Neill. Do yourself a favor. She is an amazing frickin' Sheela.
She is amazing, frickin' Sheela. Thank you for sharing her. I can't wait to see some of her other artwork. I had no idea who she was, even though Cupies were such a major part of my childhood.
I know.
They were just like the backdrop of my childhood in
the
many
backdrop.
ways.
Yeah, I think, really, very few people don't know what a Cupie is.
No.
But to think that there's all these layers.
Yes. Oh, yes.
To think that all these layers exist about who created Cupies and why and what it stood for is just so freaking fascinating to me.
Well, may I say I'm glad you went down this rabbit hole. It's been very enlightening and informative.
Despite that it totally screwed up our schedule today.
Oh, that's okay. Actually,
April, I won't be there by 12 or 12:30 because I'm still down the rabbit hole.
Right.
Don't call me.
Yeah, if you remember back to part 1, we started out planning to record this at 1 o'clock. Now we're in my backyard at 7 o'clock. It's dusk. It's getting dark.
Damn, and I have a rehearsal with the Imogines tonight at 8. I better get home.
You better get home. So we better say good night and thank you, and please comment. And we'd love to know what you're thinking about this wonderful Sheela.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Peace out.
Go have yourself a canned martini.
A canned vodka martini. They're fabulous.
SheelaNaGig.